you go to the rabbi and ask for teshuvah. Give me a regimen, what I can do to atone for myself if I did something wrong. And the truth is, you have to be really creative. Because there's no, I think in other religions, like say Hail Marys, and there is a concept that you give it tzedakah. But the main thing, the main part of tshuva is to make sure you don't do it again. Number one, to say you're sorry to God, not to any priest. That's called confession. It's called vidui. We do that in our tefillah. And if possible, if you know exactly what you did, then you should mention that explicitly. Yeah. We go through the alphabet just in case to cover it all. But if you know specific something that you have to do tshuva for, you should say that in your prayers and ask forgiveness. And most importantly, as I started saying, is take it upon yourself to be more careful in the future so it doesn't happen again. See what you need to do maybe to make sure it doesn't happen again. I don't know, fix your kitchen labeling if necessary, whatever it is. Stuff happens. But and in terms of, expressing your sorrow, making up for it, any good deed, really. It doesn't have to be tzedakah. You could take upon yourself to do a good deed. Learn some more Torah. Here we are in yeshiva, isn't that? Yeah, sorry?
No, I said I'm very hungry for a zine cookie. Inside joke.
All right, no problem. Okay, let's open up our books. We're learning about the laws of Purim. We're starting chapter 15. We actually started chapter 15. We talked a little bit. Thank you. We're using the books Zmanim of Pnei Halacha, and we had an introduction about the miracle of Purim historically, and how that really was so significant that God doesn't leave the Jewish people even though we went into exile. And then the last section that we learned was perhaps a newer perspective for some of us on Purim as a holiday of receiving the Torah. You guys missed that on Thursday, I think, but I'll catch up with you later how it went. Hope everything was okay. Purim as a time when the Jewish people, because the Mcgill says explicitly that Jewish people accept upon themselves the holiday of Purim, which is a new holiday. But the rabbis took that to mean that they accepted themselves all of the mitzvot of the Torah, and this time it was without coercion. This time was love, because they were saved from the persecution, and they were so happy and so pleased and so thankful to Hashem that they re-accepted upon themselves, dedicated themselves. Yes, we're going to stick to the Jewish people, and the context, as we said, was that the Jewish people was on the brink of assimilation. In the Persian culture, and this somehow this black cloud, the threat of extermination, pushed them to the wall and brought the best out of them. Brought the Pintele Yid. You know what that means?
No. What does it mean?
It's a little spark of the Jew. They say that every Jewish person, no matter how estranged or assimilated he is, he has a little spark of identity that he's not willing to give up on, and this sort of forced it to catch. The spark turned into a flame, and the Jewish people.
The oil is coming up on the wall.
Maybe, yeah, and that was the turning point to the era, to start off the era of the Second Temple period, where Judaism really got revived. We mentioned a couple of months ago. Not everybody was here. 1 second. That. There was a leader that was as great as Moshe Rabbeinu. Who remembers who it was? Ezra, right? So he renewed the covenant with the Jewish people. Not only that they should, get rid of their foreign wives, but he taught them the Torah, and he explained it to them with a big emphasis on the explanation. So really, we're entering a new era of understanding the Torah, Second Commonwealth, right? And developing it, the oral law, as opposed to biblical times where it's prophets and the written law. We always had an oral law together, but it really got developed and written down eventually after this period of Ezra. Okay, so we're going to continue from where we left off. First, I'll take a question.
Yeah, one question.
Michael.
because you can say like remember from time of Ezra was the mark of the new Second Temple period, right?
Yes.
But what's the connection between Purim? Was there like also like a big spiritual connection, like a preparation for the people to come on that level of Ezra?
So I think the preparation, the focal point of this interpretation, which appears in the Gemara, the Talmud mentions this, that Purim was very significant because they reaccepted the Torah out of love, and it's really expressed in particular by the fact that they accepted a new mitzvah, that they created a new mitzvah, created
oral Torah, right?
Oral Torah, exactly. This is a symbolic of the entire oral Torah that they accepted Purim. So let's start on page 314. It's section number 3 in chapter 15, establishing Purim as a permanent holiday. David, will you read for us, please?
Sure. Establishing Purim as a permanent holiday. Even though the joy over the celebration was great, it was initially unclear how the event should be marked. Esther wrote to the sages, write an account of me for future generations. That is, write down the Purim story and include it as one of the holy books of the Tanakh. Esther further requested, establish me for future generations. That is, establish the days of Purim for future generations as days of joy and reading the Megillah. At first, the sages were unsure about this, both because it might arouse feelings of vengefulness among the nations of the world to see Israel rejoicing over their downfall, and also because they were uncertain whether it was appropriate to add to the Torah another description of Israel's war against Amalek. In the end, they found scriptural allusions indicating that there are grounds to write about the Battle of Amalek once again. Thus, the men of the Great Assembly composed Megillat Esther, the Scroll of Esther. Through divine inspiration and established Purim as a holiday for future generations. The men of the Great Assembly, Anshe Knesset Hagadah.
So let's just stop for a second. I'll just explain one thing, that the Gemara has this language where Esther turns to the Beit Din, to the men who were running, men of the Great Assembly, the people who were running the show, and she, as a prophetess, she as the heroine, of course, her requests had particular value, and she had two requests. One is Kitvuni ledorot, write me for all generations. Mm-hmm. And we understand that to mean that add Megillat Esther into the Bible, perhaps the latest or one of the latest books of the Bible. And as we know, it made it in there. We have Megillat Esther. And so that was accepted. Great. And then the second question that now he's dealing with is, and as he said, the rabbis found some precedents, some hints to it in the Torah that the story of Amalek perhaps should appear 3 times. Of course, once with Moshe, once with, second time? Shaul, good. And the third time with Esther, very good. The next question was a little bit more thornier, and that is, Kevaoni ledorot. And that is, establish me, or my holiday, as a holiday for all generations. Kevas, to establish. Yeah. Katav is to write. So she had 2 requests. First one was granted. Let's see what happens with the second one. Okay, go ahead, David.
The men of the Great Assembly, Anshe Knesset Hagadah, constituted the supreme Beit Din that functioned at the beginning of the Second Temple period. It was comprised of 120 of 120 elders, among them prophets and sages such as Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, Ezra, the scribe, Nehemiah, Ben Chachaliah, Mordechai, the same Mordechai that appears in Megillat Esther, and Zerubbabel, Ben Shealtiel. Ezra, the scribe, was the most prominent of all, so much so that the men of the Great Assembly are sometimes called the Beit Din of Ezra the scribe. They were the great Beit Din that established the first major enactments that are considered rabbinic mitzvot, and they were the impetus for the continued activity of the sages of the oral Torah. The Purim Miracle is considered the last miracle that was allowed to be recorded in the Tanakh, as the sages state. Esther is the end of all miracles. Thus, in effect, the writing of Mcgill of Esther concludes the Tanakh. Purim is the link that connects the written Torah and the oral Torah. This is reflected in the status of its mitzvot, which are considered divrei Kabbalah, an intermediate category between Torah commandments and rabbinic ones. On the one hand, they are not on the level of mitzvot that are written in the Pentateuch. On the other hand, they are not considered rabbinic mitzvot, since Megillat Esther is included in Scripture. The Rishonim disagree about how one should behave if an uncertainty arises regarding the laws of Purim. Does the Halakha demand that one be stringent, as in case of Torah commandments, or lenient, as in case of rabbinic enactments? One must perform 7 mitzvot on Purim. 4 of them are unique to Purim. First, 1. Reading the Megillah. 2. Mishloach manot, sending gifts of food to a friend. 3. Matanot le'evyonim, giving gifts to the poor. And 4. Participating in a festive meal. The remaining 3 are rabbinic commandments that parallel rabbinic obligations on other holidays. 1. Reading the Torah for men. 2. Commemorating the day by reciting Al HaNisim in our prayers and in Birkat Hamazon. And 3. Refraining from fasting and delivering eulogies.
Okay, so this was interesting. We pretty much restating everything we've said, but he added this idea of there's a status in between biblical law and rabbinic law. And I think we've mentioned it before, but it's a rabbinic law which has verses about it in the Tanakh. So it's rabbinic, but it's written in the Tanakh. Let me share with you a little idea that I heard from my Rosh Yeshiva, of Chaim Druckman, may he live and be well for very long years. The Gemara records about this issue. Kitvuni l'derot. Is the story of Esther going to make it into the Bible? It's the last one, the last miracle. And the rabbis had a criterion. Well, which there's always miracles. Which one should be included? And the Gemara answers only miracles which were necessary for all generations, or have a message, really, probably what they meant to say, for all generations. Those miracles are included in the Tanakh, and not any other. So we have to look for, obviously, in the story of Esther, what's the special, unique message for all generations that the story of Esther tells us that we didn't have yet before. With all the other miracles, there were so many miracles in the Torah. How much more can you add? Anything beyond splitting of the sea? A miracle of Esther. How does that add to the supernatural miracles of the Exodus and all the other miracles that the Jewish people had in the time of they went through the desert? And the explanation that Rav Druckman taught us was, I think it's based on the Maharal, is that we like to think in very clear categories. There's supernatural miracles and then there's natural miracles. Supernatural miracles, of course, something where God shows his hand, repeals the usual laws of nature, and there's no other explanation that God is choosing to show his favor to the Jewish people and perform this miracle. So it's almost, as we said last week, it's almost a form of force. You see in a supernatural miracle, there's no chance that you cannot believe. But then, and really this is perhaps the innovation of the miracle of Esther, the miracle of the story of Esther, is where the miracle comes through absolutely natural means. There's no splitting of the sea. As we said the other day, you read the story, it reads like a political drama. There's even some sex. There's some, a beauty contest. There's desire. There's money involved. There's jealousy involved. It's a very human story. and it just happens to be that he's reading at that moment, and the whole story, and some I think Mcgill mentioned the name of God doesn't even appear throughout the entire Megillah. In other words, this is the natural miracle par excellence, and perhaps that's the chiddush, that's the innovation, that's the unique feature that was missing from the Tanakh, that we have to add the book of Esther to make sure that it gets in there. The message for all generations is that natural miracles are also miracles. They're also the hand of God. They also is a primary way in which God runs the world. It doesn't always tear open the curtain and let you see the background, what's working behind the scenes. We have to search for it. But sometimes, and the truth is, the way the Megillah is presented, it's almost like a satire. It's almost clear that there's just so many coincidences and so many things that just happen exactly the opposite of what they were planned. It's leading us to understand that yes, there's a director behind this play. There's a guiding hand, and that's the message perhaps that needed to get into the Tanakh. Kitvuni ledarot, because the message of this type of prophecy, this type of miracle, has a message for all generations. This was his interpretation. I think it's a beautiful one. But at the end of the day, she succeeded. Esther is part of the Bible, and the rabbis established a holiday. And as innovative as that might be, rabbinic power is expressed here in the fact that they're even able to add an entire holiday. Ab initio, as they say. It was or ex nihilo. It was like out of nothing. The Torah doesn't say anything, do anything in the month of Adar. Nothing special. Even the death of Moshe was hidden. It doesn't say that in the Torah. You're not supposed to do anything special. But along came the rabbis, and based on this, their understanding of the power of the oral law, they said yes, one may institute a rabbinic holiday, and we always talk about this. Usually we talk about a little more on Hanukkah, because Hanukkah is the other. It's the pair of Purim. How is it a pair? How is it similar?
Two rabbinic holidays.
It's also a rabbinic holiday, exactly. So, and usually the Gemara, when it discusses Hanukkah, it asks, how can we make a bracha when we light the Hanukkah candles? Baruch Hashem Elokeinu Melech Asher Kiddushanu, who sanctified us with his mitzvot and commanded us, v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Hanukkah. Command. Where did he command us? Where did God command us? So the Gemara asked that explicitly when it comes to Hanukkah. Regarding Purim, we have a similar story. It's really the same level. Perhaps it's a little bit stronger Purim because there's verses about Purim. There's no biblical text when it comes to Hanukkah. That was towards the end of the Second Temple, after the Bible had been canonized, as they say. So the answer to the question is, how could the rabbis institute? Where's the commandment from God? When it's the rabbis that institute it, where does God come in? And the answer is everything that we learn about the oral Torah, that the rabbis have the power to create mitzvot. And you have to listen to the words of the rabbis, Lo tasur, right? Parshat Ekev in the book of Dvarim, do not turn from the words of the sages, right or left. And so again, that discussion we usually have more on Hanukkah, but it's the same discussion regarding Purim, that this is a rabbinic mitzvah instituted, and the rabbis have the power to do that. Just to remind us, how can the rabbis add a mitzvah? Doesn't that say in the Torah you're not allowed to add anything to the Torah or take away anything from the Torah? Right? You're not allowed to tosifu, bal tosif. You're not allowed to add anything to the Torah. So how can the rabbis add an entire new holiday? The answer usually given is that they're allowed to add as long as they're clearly not turning it into a biblical level mitzvah. They're adding a rabbinic mitzvah. So as long as you're not claiming power that you don't have, you're not claiming to to create something that's biblically mandated. It's rabbinically mandated, and that has significance. We talked about it many times. Difference between the biblical level of obligation, the rabbinic level of obligations. If you have a doubt, if something went wrong, the flexibility that you have. But the basic concept is that the rabbis have the power to add mitzvot on the level of rabbinic mitzvot, and that's what Purim is. Yeah.
But how you keep the balance between that? Because what I notice is like on Purim and Hanukkah, it's not Shabbos. You can buy. Is that like the balance, or what's the balance they create?
So very good. So the balance comes to play really in the fine details, because we have to keep the rabbinic mitzvot with as much care as we keep the biblical mitzvot. As a matter of fact, there's a fascinating halacha that if you cost you money and your entire house is going up in flames, and the classic example is the laws of Shabbat. To put out a fire to save your money is only a rabbinic prohibition, and yet we're commanded, don't violate those rabbinic prohibitions. Because the extinguishing in the Torah, there is one of the 39 categories of biblical work prohibited, but it's very, very circumscribed. And the type of putting out a fire so that you don't get hurt or so you don't get lose your money, it's really only biblically prohibited. It's not one of the violations of the biblical law. And yet, we are commanded to give up everything we can not to violate a rabbinic command. So rabbinic commands are very binding, very powerful. And when we accept upon ourselves to be Jewish, in the Beit Din, they ask you, are you willing to do all the mitzvot and all the rabbinic mitzvot? This is part of the Torah. This is a part of the power of the oral Torah that we've spoken about so many times. So for all intents and purposes, they're the same. So where do you see any difference? I'm saying, we have to make a difference, otherwise we'll have a problem that you're adding mitzvot to the Torah. There has to be a difference. But those difference is it's really shown in fine details. Like if you have a debate whether or not you have a doubt whether you fulfilled the mitzvah or not. This general rule is that on a biblical mitzvah you have to go lechumra, you have to be stringent. And if it's a rabbinic mitzvah, you can go lekula, you can be lenient. So the truth is here it's a little bit complicated because this is not merely rabbinic, it's divrei Kabbalah. He just said it's that middle category between biblical, because it's rabbinic but it's written in the Tanakh. And so some opinions say you have to be more stringent, even about the mitzvah of Purim. But there are many fine differences. We'll probably see them along the way. But it's important to remember, this is a rabbinic mitzvah. Purim and Hanukkah are the rabbinic holidays, and they don't have the same impetus, the same power as biblical holidays. But of course, it's almost ironic. Of all of the Jewish holidays, which ones do you think are the most popular amongst Jews around the world? Even estranged Jews. I think Hanukkah and Purim, believe it or not.
I think the reason for that is because there's a lot more physical observance. And I would also include Pesach and Sukkot in those categories. To a lesser extent.
Sukkot is way down on the list. I think people, who are disconnected, they never heard of Sukkot, maybe. Well, but Pesach, I agree with you. Pesach is important. And then there's the comparison to the Christian holidays. Easter and Pesach are connected. And then Hanukkah and Christmas are around the same time of year. So culturally, you could explain that. Purim, though, what's equivalent to Purim?
It would be Halloween, yeah.
Halloween, Mardi Gras. There's also
It's very physical. There's a physical device that we use to celebrate the Chag.
All of the holidays have something physical to it. Of course, food. But they also, the shofar, there's always something physical. But you're right. I think that the one, the Hanukkah, most importantly, the candles and there's always food. But I think Purim is very accessible because it's all about fun and parties and masquerades and food, giving gifts, and it's a very social holiday. So I'm sure that has something. And the rabbis were bright; they knew how to institute a holiday if they wanted their words to be listened to. They came up with good stuff, and obviously they were guided by divine influence. By the way, I'll just mention another thing that's a criteria for something to make it into the Tanakh. We assume that all the books of the Bible were written with divine inspiration. Right? Esther was one of the 48, or the, what is it, 15 prophetesses? There's a list of 48 prophets, and I can't remember exactly how many prophetesses. But she was one of them, and Esther was a prophetess, and at least the book was written by her and the men of the Great Assembly with divine inspiration, and that's why it was it merited to be in the Tanakh. So can't forget that element. So there was definitely divine aid in creating this holiday, and it's ironic that that's what they say, that the oral Torah, perhaps in many ways, is stronger than even the written Torah. I many times have told you that, in my opinion, the major book of Judaism is not the Tanakh, but it's the Talmud, right? Whereas the Talmud is recording the dynamic oral tradition of the Jewish people that builds, of course, on the Tanakh and develops it. But somehow that has even more power than the biblical mitzvot. It's a fascinating element because I think the explanation is quite intuitive. Someone shared with me over the weekend an idea about why the first thing, Parshat HaShavua, why right after the Jewish people had the revelation at Sinai, one of the first major tasks is to build the Mishkan. Build this tabernacle, whatever a tabernacle is. Build it. Why? And then the Jewish people had to give donations, gold, silver, and all the stuff that they had, and to make a long Dvar Torah shorter. The concept is the importance of getting people involved. That's what makes it your own. When you do it, if God's just commanding you to do, then you're passive. You have to take an active part in the Torah. It's symbolized by the Mishkan and the gifts that the people gave in order to create the Mishkan, Truma, the gift. So this instills the commandments much deeper into your DNA of being Jewish. And then the parallel to that would be the oral Torah versus the written Torah. Oral Torah is the moves made by the rabbis as opposed to the biblical Torah, which is just mandated and instructed from above. So yeah, that's another. We're on the right topic here of understanding the import and the impetus and the special, unique status of the Purim holiday. Okay, let's go on. Let's continue now. There's a special feature which we really don't find of any other mitzvah in the Torah about the reading of the Mcgill about the Purim holiday, and that is that there's 2 dates. 2 separate dates. We're a little bit confused because we all know that there's 2 dates because Chutz La'aretz, there's 2 days of Yom Tov, and in Israel is 1 day. But think back, biblically, that didn't exist. There was no 2 days of Sukkot, 2 days of Pesach. The only holiday which gets 2 days is Purim, and that's by, it's written in the Megillah that the rabbis decided to make 2 dates. Fascinating. Let's take a look and read section 4 on page 316. Okay, Russell, will you read for us, please?
Of walled and unwalled cities. There is a unique halakha pertaining to Purim that has 2 dates. In most places, Purim is celebrated on the 14th of Adar, while in cities that were surrounded by a wall at the time of Yoshua ben Nun, and in Ahasuerus' capital city of Shushan, it is celebrated on the 15th. In order to understand the reason for this distinction, we must first recall the order of events. Haman's decree stated that on the 13th of Adar, all the enemies of Israel could destroy, massacre, and exterminate all the Jews throughout the world. This decree was not abolished even after Mordecai and Esther's amazing rise to power, because by law, any decree written in the king's name and sealed with the king's signet could not be revoked. Therefore, the only thing they could do was to issue issue an additional edict, also sealed with the king's signet, allowing the Jews to defend themselves and kill their enemies. Until the 13th of Adar, it was unclear how matters would develop. Granted, the Jews had permission to defend themselves without interference from the Persian army, but who knew if they would succeed in defeating their enemies? Then, on the 13th of Adar, fear of the Jews fell upon the people of the land, and the Jews were able to defeat their enemies.
Stop there for a second. Do you I don't know if you caught what I said last week, that the East turned into the Wild West, right? And the 13th of Adar, it was a free-for-all. The Wild East, okay? Go ahead. So the 13th was the day, and then on the next day,
The 14th of Adar, the Jews rested from battle, making it a day of feasting and joy. In the capital city of Shushan, however, there were so many enemies of Israel that the Jews were unable to kill them all in one day. Therefore, Queen Esther came before King Ahasuerus and asked him to grant the Jews permission to take revenge against their enemies for one more day. Once he agreed to Esther's request, the Jews of Shushan continued eradicating their enemies on the 14th of Adar and rested on the 15th, making it a day of feasting and joy. Since the first Purim was celebrated on 2 separate days, the sages perpetuated this feature with their enactment. Therefore, in most places, Purim is celebrated on the 14th of Adar, whereas in Shushan, where the miracle was greater because all the events of the Mcgill occurred there, and because the Jews took revenge against their enemies over 2 days, Purim is celebrated on the 15th. The sages also enacted that in all prominent cities like Shushan, Purim should be celebrated on the 15th, and the indicator of a city's prominence is having a wall like Shushan did.
okay, stop there. So we see that there's other explanations as well. But the bottom line is that the story that's told is that the day of celebration was the 14th for most people, and on Shushan the day of celebration was the 15th, and so that's what they took that original dating, and they kept it for all generations. Many have attempted to give explanations of why. I mean, you could imagine just saying, well, let's just get it all together into one holiday, into one date. It was important for the rabbis to keep that separation. And the explanation that I like to give is brought by the Ramban, Nachmanides, in his commentary on the Talmud, and he explains that perhaps this is a little bit of a moral message that the rabbis wanted to give to the people of the 15th, the people of Shushan. And it sort of separates them off from the rest of the Jewish people, not so much because they're better than, but it's sort of the whole fact that they had to fight an extra day and only rest a day later was a little bit of an educational exercise for them. Because at first, they felt, we're in a walled city. We're protected. We don't have to fear the anti-Semitic hooligans that are going to go on a rampage against the Jews all over the empire. We're in the capital city. We're protected either by the government, police, which is a little bit tighter in the capital, or these walls will not allow anybody in. And so perhaps they were a little bit complacent, and they were not joining their brothers, feeling the pain of the rest of the Jewish people, which were, of course, under threat on the 13th, and sort of to chide them and to instill this message that if one Jew is in trouble anywhere in the empire, that all the Jews have to take part. And the fact that they were separated off in that they had to fight for 2 days and celebrate separately might be a little bit of a message there about unity, about how important it is for us to feel our fellow brothers, and when they're in times of trouble, even if they are far away and you think, oh, they're in trouble, I'm okay, I can forget about them. This perhaps was the sage's way of teaching us, reminding us of that really we're all in the same boat. So there's many different interpretations of why it is, but the bottom line is the Mcgill is very clear that there was 2 days of celebration, one on the 14th, one on the 15th, And the walled cities celebrate on the 15th, whereas the unwalled cities on the 14th. Now, I'll just tell you the names. In the Megillah, Mukaf, or Mukafin is the way it's used. In the plural, sometimes a nun instead of a men. Mukaf means to be surrounded by a wall. And the opposite of that is the cities that are unwalled. There's a word for that in Hebrew. It's called prazin. Prazot means that they're open cities. So this is walled, literally means surrounded, and unwalled is prazim, open cities. So this is literally means open, and this literally means surrounded by a wall. Okay, so these are the two types of cities. And we're going to see that this is very of practical import, more so in this generation than in thousands of years of history. Why? Why is this more practical today than it's been? This law has been on the books since the institution, but it was never really. It was kind of like a dead letter, really.
Because like most of the time Jews were living in Hutzlawitz.
Also,
Like always on the front.
right.
Are you having an Eruv?
No.
Because the people of Israel control Jerusalem again. That's just walled.
Jerusalem is walled, good, but what else? But the major difference is that the ease of travel nowadays. What do? You spend half the day in Tel Aviv and half the day in Jerusalem. In those days, it was either or. It took a few days to walk between cities, and with your mule or whatever it is. Nowadays, you hop in the car. In 10 minutes, you're in the walled city. You're outside of the walled city. We travel every day distances that people only dreamt of. So and so that makes all these questions of how to celebrate Purim when you're in between cities.
That happened to me 2019 when I was here. It was like 14th I was in Efrat and on 15th I was in Jerusalem. Like,
so you had two Purims.
Yeah.
We're going to see the laws of that coming up.
What happens if you have no Purims?
That's also possible. You would be missing out, but you don't want to miss the mitzvah the Rabbanan.
But if you just...
Technically, it could happen. Some people say it could happen.
How would you do that?
You couldn't. We're going to see. There's a number of opinions on that. Those 2 days.
Only 2 days?
Oh, well, yes. Nowadays, there's only those 2 days. Either the 14th or the 15th. But we'll see. And of course, I jumped a stage in that up till now, I stopped Russell from reading. And the sages enacted that prominent cities that have a wall, like Shushan, but then they made a different definition, which has to do with the land of Israel. Go ahead, read in the middle, page 317. At that time, however,
Eretz Israel was in ruins, and if they had based their observance of the enactment on the state of cities at that time period, there would not be one city in all of Eretz Israel whose residents would celebrate Purim on the 15th of Adar, because none of them were walled at that time. Therefore, in honor of Eretz Israel, the sages decided that in all cities that were surrounded by a wall at the time of Yehoshua, Purim would be celebrated on the 15th of Adar, even if they were currently in ruins, while in all other cities, Purim would be celebrated on the 14th. The only exception is Shushan, as even though the city was established after Yehoshua's time, Purim is celebrated there on the 15th since the miracle occurred there.
I think there is a shul still today in Shushan, Susa.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. There's
Iran?
just a few Jews in Iran.
In Iran.
In Iran, there's still a few Jews still there. There's actually a big courtyard around the building, and it's a tourist site. There's a real shul. People visit it. You could see on the internet videos of people going in. They have the chamber of Esther and the chamber of Mordechai, and apparently they have something that looks like a tombstone of Mordechai and Esther. I mean, Mordechai when he came to Israel, so maybe it's just the tomb of Esther who stayed there. But whatever it is, nowadays there's no real Jews in Shushan. But there are plenty of Jews in Jerusalem, right, who had a walled city from the time of Yehoshua ben Nun, and a few other cities, Hebron. We're going to see. Today, let's keep going, Yarsel, page 317 at the bottom.
Today, Jerusalem is the the only city in which Purim is celebrated on the 15th of Adar, because it is the only place about which we have a clear tradition that it was surrounded by a wall at the time of Yoshua ben Nun. Regarding some cities, it is uncertain whether or not they were walled at that time. There is even uncertainty about Shushan's exact location. We will elaborate on these laws in chapter 7.
Okay, so there's a whole chapter, it's the last chapter in the book, about walled and unwalled cities, and how if you're moving between one and the other, even here in Jerusalem itself, there's a problem. Because, well, the walled section of Jerusalem, we know where that is, it's very small. What about the communities, the neighborhoods, which, I think it was Moshe Montefiore, who was first moved outside of the walls. It's the windmill, windmill. That's the first neighborhood outside the walls. Kiryat Moshe, named after Moshe Montefiore. That's right. Anyways, there's communities that cropped up, and right now there's already contiguous settlement and residences from the old city all the way to here. And so the bottom line is, we are considered to be in the extension of the walls of Jerusalem. But then there is always a new community and another, Baruch Hashem. The greater Jerusalem keeps being built. How far can you extend Jerusalem? And so you might have a neighborhood which is municipally considered to be part of Jerusalem, but there's fields of, it could be a kilometer or two in between of a highway that's connecting them. So it's 2 seconds on the bus, but actually there's no continuous French Hill. It started that way, but now it's connected. Ramot is the classic example. Yeah. But even now Ramot is getting connected because you have, the Shuafat, Ramat Shlomo, which is sort of closer and almost attached to Ramot. But now there's Pisgat Zev and Givat Zev and many new neighborhoods which are really the extension of Jerusalem. And that's chapter 17. They deal with all that. What's considered to be part of this city, what's not, and moving in between those walled cities, not walled cities. It's a very common question if you're traveling. But we're going to leave that for chapter 17. Go back to the major mitzvot of Purim. And as we said, there are 4 major mitzvot. Remember them? Megillah, Shlach Manot, Matanot La'Avyoni. Right. So there's 4 mems. Megillah. It's easy to remember. Megillah. Mishlach Manot, which is giving gifts of food. Matanot La'Avyonim. And the 4th one is the meal, exactly. How's that a mem? I don't know. Seudah. I don't know.
There's a lot of there's a lot of verbs that start with the letter mem. So
I'll think about it. Ma'achal, I don't know, food. Mevashel, good to cook, I don't know. Mezonot, hamotzi, right? The mem stands for hamotzi, something you're supposed to wash for this meal. So those are the 4. Anyways, let's start with the first one, Megillah. That's the major one, the most important one. I think it's the center. There's a tractate in the Talmud about the festival of Purim. What's it called? The Masechet in the Shas. What's it called? It's not called Masechet Purim. Masechet Megillah. Right, so Megillah is the central mitzvah. We'll start with that one, and we'll go on from there. Questions somebody wanted to ask?
Wait until then.
Okay. So we're on page 318 now, section 5, reading the Mcgill and publicizing the miracle. Not time. Go for it.
Okay, everyone is obligated in the mitzvah of reading the Megillah, men, women, and converts. One who hears someone else read the Megillah discharges his obligation, as long as the reader is obligated in the mitzvah. However, if one hears it from a minor who is not required to observe mitzvot, he has not fulfilled his obligation. The main purpose of reading the Megillah is to publicize the miracle and demonstrate that God rules and oversees the world, directing everything for the best. Even the worst troubles eventually turn around for the good. And this understanding strengthens people's faith in God and stimulates them to do more to reveal His name and rectify the world.
Okay, so it's I'll write that in Hebrew as well. The actual act is to read the Megillah, but the motivation or the the principle behind it is called Pirsume. This is going to be in Aramaic. Nisa, Aramaicized aleph at the end. In Hebrew, Pirsum Hanes, which means to publicize the miracle. Publicize. Right, Nisa, the aleph replaces the Hey Hayidiyah in Hebrew, so publicize the capital T, the miracle. Okay, to publicize the miracle. So what does that mean to publicize the miracle? To make yourself, first of all, publicize for yourself, but also for others. And this is again a commonality with the other rabbinic holidays, Hanukkah. Hanukkah, we light the candles outside, if possible. The original idea was, because you're supposed to publicize the miracle. Have you ever heard of people reading the Mcgill outside?
Yes.
Maybe. But there's definitely an effort to read the Megillah in everywhere possible. Even people who can't make it to the synagogue, you should make a reading of the Megillah in the community center. Make a reading of Megillah in the old age home. Like Chabad, exactly. So this idea of publicizing the miracle, taking it outside, reaching the masses, is an essential part of the holiday of Purim, of the major. Like lighting the candles, everybody's familiar with it about the public lighting of the candles, but by Purim it's similar. You'll see people.
Wait,
yeah, sure.
I know in many sharing they always drive with the car and telling something. They always do that with Miracle of Esther.
So we're going to see there's rules. You have to actually be reading from a scroll. So hearing on a loudspeaker is a little bit iffy, but. Yeah, we're going to read about it.
I thought that was just like...
No. It has to be, to say a bracha, you have to be reading from a proper scroll. We're going to see all the laws right now. Okay, go ahead.
Reading the Megillah in public to broadcast the miracle it's so important that even the Kohanim working in the temple would delay the daily meat offering in the morning in order to hear the Megillah with the congregation. Only afterward would they offer the tamid. Similarly, Torah scholars who are occupied by the study of Torah, even if they can read the Megillah with a minyan in their study hall, should nevertheless interrupt their studies in order to go to the synagogue and hear the Megillah together with the masses.
Right, the greater the public, the greater the
Mitzvah.
The publication, the publicizing, the big public notice which will be made. You could always have small little groups gathering and making a minyan. It's good enough, but you'd be missing the point of publicizing the miracle, making it, doing it. Therefore,
the members of a synagogue that usually hosts several minyanim every day should try to gather together on Purim and hear the Megillah with a large number of people. However, one who generally prays in a small synagogue need not change his fixed practice in order to hear the Megillah in a large synagogue, provided that there will be a minyan at the reading he attends. Okay? Only as a last resort, if one is unable to hear the Megillah read in a minyan, one fulfill the mitzvah in private with a bracha.
With a bracha. So I've done this, unfortunately, many times. There's somebody who I once read the Megillah for, who had cancer and was doing chemotherapy.
Right.
And it's very dangerous for it to be exposed to other people. You could get, your immune system's weak, and you could pick up a germ, and that could kill her. So we did a private reading for her in our home, and someone had a Megillah, a kosher Megillah, and we said the bracha for, even though without a minyan, and it's possible. You don't technically have to have a minyan for the Megillah, but it's definitely preferable, and even a big minyan is preferable. Okay, when to read the Megillah? Let's move ahead. Moshe, got to keep Moshe awake here.
When to read the Megillah? One must read the Megillah at night and again during the day to commemorate the fact that the Jews cried out to God in their time of need during the day and at night. The nighttime Megillah reading may take place at any point during the night.
Let me just stop you for a second. This is strange. Just recognize what's going on here. Almost all the mitzvot of the holidays, shofar, lulav, The other mitzvot too. Brit Milah, they're really supposed to be done during the daytime. Most mitzvot are for the daytime. The truth is, reading the Megillah, the daytime is the central one too. It's the more important one. He's going to say that later on. But the rabbi said we should double it. We should do the mitzvah twice, which is a little strange phenomenon. Do the same mitzvah twice, right? You don't have 2 meals on the Purim meal. You don't give Mishloach Manot twice. You don't do Matanot Levinim twice. You do it once during the day. All the mitzvot, really, all 4 mitzvot should be done during the day. It's a unique feature that we read the Megillah at the night before as well. But, and now he says anytime, the details of that are coming.
For Pesach, it's night.
Pesach's different because it's the night of the Exodus from Egypt, because the miracle happened at night. But that's an exception. But then there are other exceptions, of course. Right. We light the Hanukkah candles at night because if you light them in the day, nobody would see them, right? But because the mitzvah is candles. But those are exceptions. In general, the mitzvot are daytime events. The world didn't really run at night until 200 years ago, when they discovered the light bulb, electricity, right? So nighttime is time to go to sleep. Okay, so you have Marav, you say Shema, there's a nighttime Shema, but then you go to sleep. And then you get up at daybreak to go out to the field and, and do your agriculture. So the concept of having the mitzvah at night is a unique feature of the Megillah, which we do it twice. But really this still remains that the essential one is in the morning. People get, somehow, though, the nighttime one gets, it's the first one, so people are more excited about it. Right. And the truth is, if you go to a Purim party at night, it's a little bit hard to get up in the morning. And it's a big problem, because really that's the more important reading of the Megillah is the morning one, not the night one. And the party that you have in the daytime is the real party, where you should be getting drunk, or where there is such a concept. The nighttime party is extra fun, just like the nighttime Megillah is extra fun. It's a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to do the nighttime reading of the Megillah. There's no real mitzvah to have a party at night, but people like to party at night, and so it's quite common.
Simple solution is that you fall asleep in you fall asleep in the Beit Midrash, so that when and then you start the late minyan, so that everyone starts to wake up. They may still be hungry.
You'll be woken up. Oh, okay.
They're in the room to hear the Mcgill in the morning.
Or that's one option. One option is to party at night, but without alcohol, because there's no mitzvah really to drink at night. The alcohol is for the daytime, so that way you can get up without a hangover and fulfill all the mitzvahs of the day with a clear mind and enjoy. So you have to. We'll talk about drinking. That is definitely a feature of Purim. But as you noticed, it's not really one of the 4 mitzvot of the day. Having the meal includes alcohol. We'll talk about why. But really the 4 mitzvot, you should... Purim is a very difficult day. Purim is a very difficult day for many religious people. Just had this discussion yesterday. Some people say they hate Purim.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But who says this?
Some people. Some people have a hard time with Purim. Because it's a, I'll tell it to you straight, it's a big balagan.
Right. No, I also know people.
It's a balagan. It's the alcohol. People, people like organized life, and it's very hard. I'm supposed to be happy, but I'm not happy. I'm depressed. What am I gonna do? And you're forcing yourself to be happy, and you drink, but you don't really like drinking alcohol. It's very confused, and so the best solution, the best advice I've heard about this problem for these people, one of these people who had this problem for many years, they came up with the solution. It's a great solution. Focus on the mitzvot. How to celebrate Purim. Focus on the mitzvot. 4 things you have to do. Read the Megillah. Give the Mishloach Manot. Give the Matanot Levinim. And have a meal. Drink a little more than usual. We'll get to that. But in the framework of the mitzvot. The main thing. This party at night, it's not a mitzvah. It's not one of the 4 big ones. So, know what you're supposed to do. Fulfill the day. You'll be much happier that you've done your obligations. And you got to have your priorities. I'm all for parties. I like parties. Be happy dance with you, but you have to keep focused, and that will maybe help you make Purim a joyous day for you. So we're starting with the mitzvah to read the Megillah, and there's a mitzvah at night. Go ahead. Moshe, page 320, second paragraph.
The nighttime Mcgill reading may take place at any point during the night, from Tzait to Alat Shachar, when the daytime reading may take place at any time during the day, from sunrise until Shkia. However, the zealous perform mitzvah promptly, reading the Megillah at night immediately after Mard, and during the day immediately after Shacharit. One may not eat or sleep before reading the Megillah at night. Studying Torah, however, is permissible. One who finds it difficult to extend Tana'it.
Ta'anit, Esther. What's Ta'anit, Esther?
To fast.
The fast day we spoke about. It's on the 13th. It's right the day before. So you finish your fast day, but before you get to eat, you dav Mariv and you have to read the Megillah right away. You could read the Megillah at midnight, but you're really supposed to do it as soon as possible.
One who finds it difficult to extend Ta'anit Esther until after the Megillah reading may drink beforehand, on condition that he avoids intoxicating drinks. Similarly, one who is very hungry may eat a snack before Megillah reading. That is, he may eat as much fruit as he wants and up to an egg's volume of grain-based foods. The same law applies to the daytime reading. However, since this reading...
So 1 second. So are you allowed to eat before the Megillah?
Yes.
If necessary. If necessary. If you're very hungry, you can take a snack. Snack. Fruit. Not mazonot, that's significant. Not a proper meal, but and nothing that is mazonot. But you can have a fruit, you can have a drink, if necessary. Okay?
Why is it prohibited to eat before?
So in all the mitzvot, I'm just going to check that the heater's on heat. Is heat coming out of there? No. I don't do anything. It is coming out. That's been there. That's good. So, what was the question?
Why it's prohibited to eat before?
I mean, there is a general principle. There's a general principle that before doing any mitzvah, one should not eat for half an hour before the time for the mitzvah comes. That's why you're really not supposed to eat half an hour before Shabbat. You're not supposed to eat half an hour before. You're not supposed to eat before performing Tkiyat Shofar. Also, it's a big problem. A lot of people do, because otherwise they'll just be too hungry. So there's leniencies, but in general, before every mitzvah, you're not supposed to eat. So this is no exception. Because if you eat, you might drink. If you drink, you might get tired and you might miss it. So it's all to make sure that you do the mitzvah at its proper time. So if you know that the Mcgill is coming, you shouldn't be eating beforehand. So that's why but if necessarily, if you're gonna not be able to concentrate on the Megillah, you're just gonna have a migraine because you've been fasting all day. Some people it happens. So then by all means, you're allowed to eat before the Megillah. Just don't make a set meal, a proper meal with mizonot or bread or something. Just have a snack. Yes, question?
With that same logic, you can say, oh, I can't do a mitzvah because it hasn't been 30 minutes yet. It's just like having 6 hours between milk and meat.
No. The time for the mitzvah starts at the beginning of the day or beginning of the night, whenever the time of the mitzvah starts. And you have to remind yourself not to eat a half an hour before that. But if it's just 10 minutes before you're eating, you can still do the mitzvah as soon as the mitzvah starts, as soon as the time for the mitzvah comes. Okay, keep going. Top of the page, 321.
The same laws apply to the daytime reading. However, since this reading takes place immediately after Shacharit, one must also be careful about all the prohibitions that apply prior to Shacharit, which are more stringent.
Right, you're not allowed to eat before Shacharit either. We spoke about that a few months ago.
Nonetheless, one who already prayed Shacharit and has yet to hear the Megillah should not eat before fulfilling the mitzvah. Under pressing circumstances, however, one may eat a snack before hearing the Megillah. Likewise, a woman may not eat before hearing the Megillah. If she is very hungry, she may eat a snack, but not a full meal. Some of the great Rishonim maintain that the mitzvah of reading the Megillah and publicizing the miracle is primarily fulfilled during the day, like all the other mitzvot of Purim. Therefore, one must be more meticulous about the daytime reading and make an even greater effort to read it in the presence of a large group of people, or at least a minyan.
Good. Okay. The next section we're going to skip right now because we're all men here and we have limited time. But there's a debate about whether women are obligated equally to men or separately. Now, the bottom line is that women are obligated to read the Megillah, just like they're obligated to light the Hanukkah candles, because it's not a standard time-bound mitzvah where the general rule is women are not obligated in time-connected mitzvah where there's a specific time here. Why should they be obligated? This is an exception because the great importance to publicize the miracle, and the women were also part of the miracle. Women were decreed by Haman to kill all men, women, and children. So they were definitely involved. And who was the heroine? She was a woman. So either way, there's two interpretations. Women were very involved in the actual miracle itself, either the primary movers or being under the threat of the persecution. So women are obligated to read the Megillah. There is a debate whether it's the same nature. It's a little bit of a detail. We're not going to get into it right now. It's probably a topic for a whole other lesson. Perhaps one of the other rabbis will give a shiur. I don't know if I'll get around to it this year. Can a woman, if a woman's obligated, can a woman read the Megillah for men? Or can a woman read the Megillah at all for women in a gathering of women? And this is something which has been very popular in the last 20 years. More and more women are gathering and having a women's Megillah reading. And some of the rabbis are against it, some are for it. Some, that's the next section. But I want to skip that. Minors also, I'm going to skip that. And we're going to go to the laws of the Megillah itself on page 326. The Megillah itself is considered holy writ, and therefore it must be written in the way a Torah scroll is written in black ink on parchment. If it is written using something other than ink or on paper, it is invalid. One who reads from it has not fulfilled his obligation. The hide from which the parchment is made must be tanned for the sake of writing Megillah. Individual sheets of parchment must be sewn together with threads made of sinews. One must etch out the lines using a stylus before commencing to write on the parchment so that the words come out straight. Further, must be written by hand. The scribe must be mindful of the sanctity of the Megillah. So it's really like writing a Torah scroll, the Megillah itself, and only if you read from that are you fulfilling your obligation.
There's a guy in the Hebrew department right now, Dave, who's I don't know if he's finished.
Dave.
He might be finished. He doesn't like David. He just goes by Dave, but he's a trained as a stam.
Scribe, yeah. So fair, stam, yeah.
Stam, and he might be finished with this Megillah. But he totally
beautiful, amazing.
I thought he was in the Spanish department.
The truth is, a lot of people that are studying to be scribes start with the Megillat Esther. Why?
Because it's long, so it requires dedication, but it's not so long that you.
Close, but no cigar. Yeah.
There's no name of Hashem in it.
Good. Writing the name of Hashem, of course, is much more dangerous.
Yeah.
So therefore, when you're practicing, also you can write the beginning of the Megillah and then the end of the Megillah, or the opposite. You can play around with it, and you can erase much more easily in a Megillat Esther, because there's no name of God, and because the rules are a little different, because it's a rabbinic mitzvah in any case, and so even if there's mistakes, he says here on page 327. When writing a Torah scroll, we make sure all of its letters are written according to the exact configuration. No letters touch each other, and of course no letters are omitted. A scribe should be likewise be careful about a Megillah. B'diavad, however, b'diavad, means after the fact, there's a difference. One may not recite the bracha over the Torah if the scroll contains a mistake of even one letter, but one may read and recite a bracha over Megillah that's missing some of the letters. If you make a mistake, you get by. If a perfectly kosher scroll is unavailable. For example, if the scribe mistakenly omitted several letters from the Megillah, wrote them incorrectly, or some of the letters faded over time, one may still use it to perform the mitzvah as long as the main part of is written properly. The reason for this is the Megillah is called a letter, meaning a letter you send in the mail. It's called an igeret in Hebrew. Igeret, a letter. A letter, indicating its purpose is to tell the story from a written document, but does not need to be as precise as a Torah scroll must be. Really, it's actually a form of oral teaching, written, put into writing, as opposed to the Torah itself, which is defined as a written document. We learn from here that one fulfills his obligation as long as the essentials of the Mcgill are written properly, condition that one fills in the missing words by reading them from a printed Mcgill or reciting them by heart, so you can actually fill in off by heart if there's a word missing. Technically, you can have a Megillah written in English, but it has to be written in ink, on parchment. And the truth is, there's some words which to this day we don't really know how to translate.
So we leave those in Hebrew. We translate the rest of it into English.
It would be kosher. It would be kosher. Rarely done. Rarely done. Why? Because if you do read from a Hebrew, even if you don't understand it, so you fulfill your obligation. And so, but if you read in English and you don't know the translation, or the translation is not written properly, your problem. So, okay, we're going to continue these laws tomorrow, B'ezrat Hashem, on section 10, page 328, finish off chapter 15, move to section 16, B'ezrat Hashem, moving ahead with the laws of Purim. We'll stop here. Thank you very much. Have a great day. Have a great week.